What's up everybody, Dusty here, back with The Sims 2, and today we're hitting the books and seeing if we can make the grade in The Sims 2 University. Now, like a lot of Sims 2 fans, this is my favorite expansion. Part of this is just that was the first expansion, so you know it's the one that the most amount of people probably played, but with a major focus of The Sims 2 being on aging and the different generations, an expansion centered around college life made perfect sense, and University has low-key served as the foundation for a lot of The Sims content we've received over the past 2 decades. But while I could talk all day about what made University so special, I'd rather just show you all, and what better way to demonstrate this than to accompany young Desmond Dust as he begins his collegiate journey. While his family's impressive wealth could have allowed him to move into one of the private residences, he decided to slum it in one of the dorms, and he'd be accompanied by his high school sweetheart Radna, their old classmate Kathy, and newcomers Vanessa and Pong. And I swear that's not me being racist, the guy's name is actually Pong and I had nothing to do with it, so if you have an issue then take it up with EA. Anyway, as to be expected, freshman year was a bit of a learning experience for Desmond and company. While these kids were all excited to be out from under their parents' thumb for the first time, it didn't take long for everybody to discover that college wasn't just relationship drama and wacky hijinks like so many raunchy teen comedies had led them to believe.
Whenever a human corpse is desecrated.
Now I can explain that.
Because unless you just plan on completely wasting your parents' money, then you've also got to attend classes, do assignments, improve your skills, and learn how to stretch the definition of plagiarism to its absolute limit in order to crank out some term papers. College is often thought of as a place for Sims to find themselves, but every year some end up cracking under the pressure. Of course, if you have a good support group around you, then it's a lot easier to make it through the tough times, and bonding over these shared experiences with your peers can often lead to the types of friendships that last a lifetime. And although college might not just be about relationship drama and wacky hijinks, there's still a pretty big part of the core experience, as the lack of full-time proper adult supervision will inevitably lead to some good old-fashioned hormone-fueled debauchery.
Debauchery!
Now for Sims like Kathy and Pong, that meant coming out of their shells and experiencing the wonders of young romance for the first time, but Desmond and Ratna already had some experience under their belt and quickly moved on to hooking up in the rooftop hot tub like a couple of degenerates.
You make your rules and we will break them! Yeah!
Once freshman year finally came to a close, it only seemed right to celebrate by having Desmond throw his first actual college party so that the whole dorm could blow off some steam. The party proved to be an overwhelming success, and the evening was highlighted by Desmond proposing to Ratna, which she accepted to the delight of everybody in attendance. As the two began their sophomore campaigns, they were completely enamored with one another and spent many nights thinking about their futures together, but you know what often happens to the best laid plans. However, I'm getting ahead of myself here. As a sophomore, Desmond was still upon the art major, which made a lot of sense since he already fancied himself something of a musician. However, coincidentally, Vanessa was going for the same degree, which meant that the two of them were now spending more time together as they attended all the same classes and naturally found themselves partnering up for group projects. Plus, their shared interest in gaming led to a lot of intense late-night LAN sessions. And Desmond had already struck up a cordial correspondence with Professor Brianna Downey when he was a freshman, as maintaining friendly relations with one's teacher is a pretty easy way for Sims to get a nice little boost to their grade. Now, is that exactly ethical? Well, probably not, but that's just how things work. Desmond's dad, Big City, had once been demoted from the vice president position at his company simply because he didn't have the right taste in movies, so Desmond was already well aware of the importance of playing the game, as it were.
I am the game, JR.
But now that he had declared his major and Professor Downey was no longer actually his teacher, Desmond's insistence on calling her most nights probably wouldn't have sat well with Ratna had she actually known about it. Now, if you're already familiar with my channel, then you might know that Desmond already had a reputation for being something of a dog back in high school. He had managed to suppress his natural tendencies and remain loyal to Ratna as a freshman, but as sophomore year went along, he found it harder and harder to avoid falling back into his old habits. I mean, even when Desmond accompanied his parents on a family vacation, he ended up skipping out on a guided tour to hang back at the hotel and flirt with one of the locals, which led him to miss out on a Bigfoot sighting. So there were some obvious warning signs that his actions might have some unforeseen consequences. But that wasn't enough to convince him to resist temptation, so while his study dates with Vanessa might have started off instantly enough, before long these two art majors began doing a little independent biology research, if you know what I mean.
Does the skin look red and swollen?
That's what she said.
That's my joke. Damn it, Dwight.
And while Desmond did his best to cover up his indiscretions from Ratna, he wasn't nearly as careful when it came to the rest of their friend group, who just did their best to ignore it. And Desmond was even more shameless when it came to seducing Professor Downey. Now you would think that a professor being felt up by one of her pupils in full view of numerous other members of the student body would lead to something of a scandal, but I suppose they have more of a European attitude towards those sorts of things over in Sim City. And you have to remember that in addition to his new responsibilities as a two-timing himbo, Desmond still had to find the time to stay on top of his studies and, actually attend the occasional class. And yet, despite having all of that on his plate, the young man still wasn't satisfied. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, college students don't tend to be the tidiest bunch, and the dorm had quickly turned into a total sty, so everybody had agreed to put some of their money towards a maid to clean up after all their nasty asses. And it didn't take long at all for the new hire to catch the eye of our protagonist. While their schedules and his current living situation meant Desmond couldn't dedicate as much time as he'd like to winning Andrea over, he still made sure to lay the groundwork and flaunt his family's considerable means whenever the opportunity arose.
I got my Magnum condoms, I got my Wad 100s, I'm ready to plow.
And so, for most of his sophomore year, Desmond got to have his cake and eat it too, and between all three of these lovely ladies, my man was feasting. However, eventually, all of his philandering would catch up to him as some of his promiscuous activity came to light when Professor Downey left a bouquet of roses accompanied by a highly incriminating love note after one of their date nights, which was discovered by Ratna. As I'm sure you can imagine, the young woman wasn't too happy about having been made a fool of and quickly proceeded to tell Desmond just where he could stick that engagement ring of his. Although luckily for Vanessa, her affair with Desmond still had yet to be revealed, so she was able to avoid being dragged into all this. Heartbroken and not to mention more than a little embarrassed, Desmond decided to move out on his own, and this would mark the beginning of his Van Wilder phase.
Remember, don't be a fool. Wrap your tool.
Now that he was free of the old ball and chain, as it were, the second half of his sophomore year was an endless parade of parties as he fully embraced the hedonistic lifestyle. Now, having already been caught and exposed once before, you might think Desmond would have learned his lesson and consider breaking things off with one of these women, but if that's the case, then you clearly haven't been paying attention. Instead, he would double down with both of them, and possibly as a sign that he hadn't quite rebounded from Ratna, he made very little effort to conceal his activities, and on more than one occasion, it almost seemed like he wanted to be caught. But despite all the freedoms it provided him, Desmond ultimately found living on his own to be unfulfilling, so early into his junior year, he applied to the prestigious Eresha Ovar fraternity. Guy, Matthew, and Mickey took an instant liking to him and declared that Desmond was worthy of joining their sacred brotherhood.
Yeah, let's fucking rage!
Now, this also meant that he had to transfer to La Fiesta Tech, as I'm sure many of you are aware that's where his new frat was located. However, I was not, and I'll admit, I spent an embarrassing amount of time attempting to track him down and thinking my game had glitched before my dumbass finally had the bright idea of checking out one of the other colleges. Desmond proved to be a natural fit and quickly finds himself settling into the frat boy lifestyle, and he's also more than happy to share the privileges that accompany his newfound status with all of his old dorm mates. And included among them was Ratna, who had displayed some surprising maturity and had taken steps to mending their relationship. Of course, the fact that she had also moved on by this point probably didn't hurt. I mean, sure, Desmond might be engaged in a steamy affair with one of his teachers, but things had begun to heat up a little between Ratna and Armando, one of the school's mascots. So who was really winning here? And just as he'd done during his sophomore year, Desmond continued to balance his standing as a god-tier party animal with his scholarly responsibilities and maintain that stellar 4.0 GPA of his. And with all of that on his plate, he'd still somehow find the time to take his fellow frat brothers under his wing and act as something of a mentor towards the underclassmen, and thanks to his guidance, young Mickey even managed to get off of academic probation. But as much as he enjoyed frat life, Desmond was still always more than happy to stop back home and pay his parents a visit, no matter whether it was to attend a party honoring his mother's heroic endeavors, paying homage to Bonkers, or just scoring some free food. And as the responsible one in the group, Desmond also took it upon himself to take care of the frat's growing sanitation issues. Granted, he had no intentions of personally handling these chores, but he had no qualms about throwing some money at the problem to make it go away, and as luck would have it, the cleaning company would send over his old acquaintance Andrea, and I'm sure you already know how this played out.
Say it.
Motivated by his romantic conquest, the other members of the frat soon began to follow his example. So I think it's safe to say that Desmond had become something of a legend at both of the campuses he had attended. However, as junior year wound down and senior year kicked off, he was also painfully aware that his time at college was nearing its end and that he'd soon find himself dealing with far bigger responsibilities than finishing up term papers. Although truth be told, he hadn't done one of those himself in quite a while, as it was usually pretty easy to find some poor sap who was willing to do him a favor these days. And when he couldn't wrangle another student into writing his papers, Professor Downey was usually more than happy to step up for her little sugar baby. And it's not like Brianna wasn't getting anything out of it. I mean, Desmond did decide to officially lock that ass down. Now that wouldn't stop him from aggressively flirting with every single woman who was willing to give him the time of day, but I mean, you know, worst case scenario, she should at least be able to pawn off the ring for a nice chunk of change if things didn't work out down the line. And since he no longer had to worry about most of his schoolwork, this left Desmond with even more time to indulge all of his vices, but this would ultimately prove to be a bit of a double-edged sword. While he undoubtedly had a bunch of good times, all of the juice-fueled benders just sort of blended together into a blur, so he couldn't actually remember many of them. And then before he knew it, he was wrapping up his final exams, graduating at the head of his class, and throwing one last epic rager. Then, after being given a brief moment to say his farewells, Desmond was being unceremoniously shoved out the door and suddenly found himself thrust into adulthood. Nobody knew exactly what life would have in store for Desmond now that he was leaving college behind, but one thing was certain. Students would be talking about his legendary exploits for years to come. What's up again, everybody? Dusty here, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you didn't, then I have no clue why you're still watching at this point, but whatever, you do you. But if you did enjoy it, then why not leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel so you can be kept up to date with all my latest content. Or don't, you know, don't let me tell you how to live your life. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, I'm out.